Hello, I'm David, and this is Sapiens Forward with news and discussion about AI topics that matter to regular people. Thank you for checking out the show. Today is June 16th, 2025. And in the show today, we're going to be looking at some of the key AI based news topics that I think you ought to be checking out along with me. Things about employment, cybersecurity, education, healthcare, stuff like that. The show's not edited or filtered in any way, so that's how you know it's real. Anyway, thanks again. Let's just get right to it. First story, Microsoft collaborates with Indian authorities to shut down tech support scam operation. So apparently, India's Central Bureau of Investigation, working with Microsoft and Japanese authorities, arrested six individuals and dismantled two illegal call centers running sophisticated tech support scams targeting Japanese citizens. The operation, called Chakra V or Chakra 5, involved searches across 19 locations and highlighted how criminals are using, here's key here, generative AI to scale fraudulent operations. So, certainly it's pretty notable about how some of these international law enforcement agencies are collaborating to dismantle cybercrime operations like that. I work in cybersecurity myself, so I'm always liking to hear that sort of thing going on. There's a lot of cybercrime happening all the time, and so it's a big deal. But what I really want to hone in on here in this particular story is what these criminals were doing, which was they were using generative AI to essentially support their operations. Now, I've talked about this in other places like on the website, sapiens4.com. We talk about cybercrime and how AI is currently being used to help people run scams on people. It's not necessarily a new thing in the sense that people have been scamming people since the dawn of history, really. I'm sure of it. But as each new technical innovation comes out, people have better tools to do the scamming with. When the internet came about years ago, the internet became a new way that people could scam folks. Well, now there's AI, and they're using it in a variety of ways. Here, generative AI. So, if you're not aware of generative AI, that is AI tools or models that are able to generate text or content that could be used in a variety of ways. It could be used to create language based content that's going to be used as part of the scam. Now, how is that interesting? Well, in one sense, because some of these people who are running the scams, they may not be speaking the same language or from the same country as the people that they're targeting. In this case, the scammers were allegedly in India, where their base of operations were, and they were targeting people in Japan. Totally different languages in most cases. So the generative AI tools are providing a number of capabilities that are going to allow them to scale up their scamming operations, allow them to provide much more effectively translated content, to create websites and materials and media that can support the scam. They're essentially creating like a whole kind of like fake call center that allowed them to funnel people into the wrong place to get support and collect some of our information, ultimately trying to steal money and things like that. So this is unfortunately a way that AI, while potentially useful and powerful in other ways that can hopefully improve people's lives and society, is also going to amplify the capabilities that criminals have in order to do not so good things. Um, Thankfully, in this particular case, the authorities were able to figure out what was happening and track it down and shut it down. But some cases it's just going to be kind of an arms race. AI tools will continue to increase in capability. Criminals and scammers will make use of those to conduct more sophisticated scams, and then hopefully the authorities will then make use of AI tools and other capabilities to fight those scams and identify the people who are doing it. I have a feeling that's really going to be going on forever. Now, what about the rest of us who are kind of caught in the middle? Well, ultimately, we're going to have to show and use so much more discernment than even we needed to before with just stuff happening on the internet in more mundane ways. We have to be careful about, if somebody calling us, were we expecting this? Typical stuff you might do if you're trying to avoid somebody just pretending to call you or send you text messages or emails, pretending to be your bank or something like that, or technical support. You need to continue to do those types of defensive behaviors and mindsets to keep yourself from being impacted. I hate to say it, but it's going to be way tougher because it's before you could see some of these emails coming through or text messages, and the language was clearly somebody who English wasn't their, in my case, English wasn't their native language, right? That's how I could quickly determine if somebody was trying to scam me. I was like, wow, I mean, the grammar's horrible here. Like, there's no way this person works for the bank. Well, now that's not going to be much of a problem for them using these AI tools. So you got to be alert. You got to be mindful, and be careful. Um, Criminals are out there trying to get you. All right, let's go to the next story. So Kaiser Permanente is implementing AI scribes for medical documentation. So Kaiser Permanente, so this is like a medical insurance organization based, you know, I think largely in the U.S. This particular story, it's centered around what they're doing in Northern California. They've deployed what they're calling AI scribe technology, and it's being utilized for a range of around 7,000 plus physicians, and it's been assisting over like 2 million patient encounters. They're reporting that it saved upwards of something like 16,000 hours of time that would have been spent in documentation and note taking and annotating information that was collected during these patient encounters, as they put it. So let's think of it as like an appointment, right? So what does this AI scribe technology does? Well, essentially, it's listening to the medical conversations that the doctors are having with the patients. It's drafting summaries, taking notes, capturing information, and ultimately, what this is doing, it's going to allow the doctors to focus more on the patient interaction itself rather than computer screens. Now, I think this is the kind of thing we want to see. Like this is very much in a kind of a AI impacting healthcare area in a positive way. This is the kind of stuff we want to report on and hear about. Regular folks like me and you, like I want to know, how is healthcare going to be benefiting from AI in a way that gives me a better experience. And I can tell you right off the bat, if my doctor can be listening to me more than trying to take notes and stuff, that's a good thing. Now, I've seen some of my doctors, like they will have a recorder, a voice recorder, and they'll put some notes into that. And that's clever. I mean, I think that works. Other times they're just sitting there at a computer typing stuff in, and you're asking me questions like, "Oh, what about this?" and I'm putting it in. Sometimes they have a nurse or physician's assistant that's taking the notes for them. But ultimately, this technology, where it's going to be used, how it's going to be used, I think is largely going to be determined by demographics. If physicians are trying to serve more patients, they're going to need to make their appointments more efficient. I just hope that it ultimately doesn't lead to just straight up replacing doctors and us talking to the computer and it giving us guidance, right? I think, some people have a really strong fear of that sort of thing. What do I think will happen? In the near future, I don't really think that's going to be the case, at least not for everybody. And here's what I mean by that. I think there could be multi-tier forms of medical care where AI is utilized in different amounts depending on what tier it is. Like maybe a higher tier of medical care, you're going to have a much larger percentage of that being purely with a doctor or a human medical care provider. At lower tiers, potentially way less, and they could be overseeing what some of the activity is from the AI tools. I don't think that's going to happen sometime in the very near future. I mean, like this year or next year, but in the coming years, I think that sort of system is going to be rolled out. Now, I don't think many people are going to want to have that kind of medical care, but there may be portions of populations in different countries around the world where that may be the best that they can get and afford. Sad to say. I mean, just being realistic here. And there may be other populations where that is way better than what they're currently getting. So I don't want to be completely negative about that concept. For folks who are not, getting any kind of medical care at all right now, maybe they're in a very remote location. Maybe there's just not many doctors to support a large population in remote location. Um, any kind of additional assistance for medical care and diagnostic work and that sort of thing would probably be a benefit. So if you look at it from that standpoint, there could be some good stuff there. But back to the main story, this whole kind of technology and annotation of meetings and notes for these doctors is actually very reminiscent of tools I've seen in other places that are much more mundane. Just using software like Zoom, for instance. Zoom for video calls. They have their kind of Zoom AI implementation that I've seen rolled out in the past year or so. And what it does, it listens into your Zoom meetings, your meetings with coworkers, customers, that sort of thing, and is listening in, taking notes, essentially capturing the content of the meeting, action items that were mentioned, things that need to be done, problems and questions. And very interestingly, at the conclusion of said meeting in Zoom, and you end your meeting, it'll send you kind of a recap, a summary of what was talked about in the meeting, action items and notes and stuff. So I'm quite sure it's a very similar type of technology doing a similar type of thing, but instead of just being for Zoom meetings, for business meetings, something like that, it's geared towards medical interactions, medical appointments, doctor visits, that sort of thing. Well, there you go. This is, in my opinion, like a pretty clear cut example of how, AI can be benefiting an area which all of us really care about, which is healthcare. We want to see our experiences with healthcare improve. And this looks like this could do it. So well done, Kaiser Permanente. All right, let's check out the next topic. Canada's AI minister prioritizes economic growth over regulatory restrictions. So Canada has an AI minister, Evan Solomon, and they've announced a shift away from heavy regulation toward maximizing AI's economic benefits. So they were speaking at a recent event, um, and they emphasize data protection and privacy as regulatory priorities. So I think it's interesting. Canada is their own country; they're going to do their own thing, which is great. I've seen other reports recently about other countries looking to take guidance or at least see what the U.S. government is going to be doing in regards to regulation, even going so far as to say to follow the lead of the US on that sort of thing. And that's interesting to me in that it seems like there's this kind of you know polar setup of countries in terms of aligning on AI, with the US on one side of things and China being on the other. I am not particularly political or I don't know, how would I want to put it, a person who's particularly interested in some kind of competition between countries. I just want to live my life, and I think most people in the world want to as well. But it does seem to be a fact of life that there's this kind of competition going on between the US and China about artificial intelligence. And it seems like the other countries in the periphery of influence, the United States and China, are looking to take notes on, which way to go with that. What does this ultimately mean for regular folks like me and you? What ultimately it means, is there going to be a lot of regulation about AI, and where's it going to be at? So certainly Canada is looking at it from the standpoint of trying to maximize the economic benefits of AI and not completely doing away with regulation, but maybe minimizing those. And where regulation is going to be put in place, it'll be around data protection and privacy. Meanwhile, United States, there's been legislation put forward about just trying to prevent states in general, states part of the United States, from implementing their own kind of regulation on AI, which is kind of scary. I mean, I did like no regulation here. There's clearly like a maximize economic potential side in order to win this so-called AI race. And other countries seem to be kind of veering into that direction. I believe there's this mindset of countries, companies just not wanting to miss out on this potential concept of just a lot of money and economic development to be gained from AI, and perhaps this fear that if there isn't enough lead developed and investment put in place, that will go elsewhere or potentially be stymied by adversaries or rivals, is maybe a better word, who develop more sophisticated AI infrastructures and systems. Well, as per usual, the regular folks like me and you kind of get caught in a mix of, countries playing this kind of game of rivalry, and what is the impact for us that we ought to be mindful of? Well, if data protections aren't really made a priority and privacy isn't made a priority, we risk this idea of like, things people are experimenting and trying out AI, like their information could be stored away in a database that they have no control over, no say over, or it could just be thrown out there and made public, because maybe some company like Meta controls Facebook and other ones decide, hey, thanks for using a Meta AI. Maybe we'd like to share all the stuff that you've been doing with AI so that other people can see it to create content. You know, you're using our tools, so we own it anyway, right? Companies like Meta, Facebook might do stuff like that if there's not privacy regulations in place or data protections put into place through national level regulations in order to safeguard users' rights and things like that. Um, with the internet, some countries, especially like looking at Europe with the GDPR, data privacy regulations, just really kind of setting kind of a standard for the importance for those types of regulations to safeguard users' rights. And really, I have some concern about, so much lack of willingness on the part of politicians in so many countries to have any kind of meaningful regulation. um, can mean like, it's just going to be the Wild West and who knows what's going to happen. So I know a lot of folks will say, oh, just got to be trusting and, we can't regulate too much or we'll fall behind because of this rivalry and this race to develop AI. Well, it matters. People's information and their privacy does matter. So how this ultimately unfolds and what we can do about it, I'm not sure many of us will be able to have a capability to impact this in a very direct way. But where we may have the capability to make an impact is our choices on which AI tools to use. That is probably the most meaningful choice we'll all have, because when the AI principles I talk about, we should all understand AI and figure out how we can use it, develop a literacy around these AI tools. We'll all be using it at one point, unless you just camped out in the wilderness completely detached, and that's okay. But if you are still part of like broader society and we're interconnected with other people in your neighborhood and your communities and stuff, you're going to be using AI at some point, more or less. And your choice will be to use this AI tool that does not safeguard or protect your privacy at all, and is basically selling your data, using your data, training on your data and your information, and putting it out there for other people to use. Or maybe you can pick a tool elsewhere that they're based in a different country that has way more stringent regulations and safeguards your privacy. So that's something we're going to be taking a look at. I don't want to spend a lot of time looking at what's new with this model versus this model, but when it comes to privacy and data protections, that is something I do want to check out. Oh, cool! You can do special. You can make videos 5 times faster than this model. Great. Okay, cool. I really care about privacy, data protections. Yeah, let's hear more about that. And that'll be something interesting to follow with Apple, because their recent conference, and despite them really having seemingly some missteps with their Apple Intelligence rollout, Apple does seem to be focusing on privacy, and they have for many years. That's been kind of a plus for me personally with Apple, which is their perceived focus on privacy for users. I think that is a very important thing. So there you go. I'm going to talk a little bit about what Canada was doing. So good job, Canada. All right. See the next one, next story. So this is kind of going over to the U.S. government. The Trump administration's federal AI initiative details were accidentally published online. So yes, the U.S. government has its own AI initiatives. Earlier this year, there are a series of executive orders put out. President Trump really kind of putting some emphasis on the U.S. being a leader in AI infrastructure and development. Well, they're certainly working on things behind the scenes. Apparently, the Trump administration has plans for a government-wide AI initiative, and that was accidentally revealed through a public GitHub repository. So, the GitHub repository, if you're not familiar with that, essentially it is a place for housing the code for building, let's say, a website or an application or software. In this case, for making a website, AI.gov is what it looks like it is going to be called. And supposedly it's set to be launched on July 4th. So, it's just a few weeks away. not too far from now, supposedly it's going to have some chatbots and API access and other types of monitoring tools for federal agencies. So we know that the Trump administration very much wants to have AI be prominent with government agencies in order to purportedly streamline operations, save money, that sort of thing. With the whole Doge effort that was led by Elon Musk, there was a lot of talk about, yes, going to lay off or have less federal workers, and in replace, try and use AI to make up for some of that lost capability for work getting done. There's also been an executive order from the Trump administration about having AI being more prominent in education. So the U.S. government in general currently has a stance to fast track investment into AI, build up AI infrastructure, become a leader in AI system development, and to lead with using AI as part of government operations itself. I think it's fascinating. I think it really was just a matter of time. So I'm not surprised that this kind of thing's in development. I think it's kind of funny that it was, accidentally released. I mean, you put it out there in a GitHub repository, and you not expect it to be found. Apparently, it got shifted, put into some kind of archived repository under GSA, the General Services Administration in the U.S. government. So folks still found it, even though they moved it. I can't imagine like they won't go forward with what their launch was unless for some reason they're delayed. So it'd be interesting to see come July this year, what kind of capabilities the federal government has. I mean, we know that, various agencies and individuals, workers in the government, US government are already using AI, but this is going to be much more centralized, it seems. So hopefully it's going to be well secured and doesn't lead to all kinds of data exposures. What we'll know in short order, if there's an increase in cyber attacks and inadvertent releases of data this summer, could be pretty spicy time. So we'll see how that goes. All right, so let's go on to our next and last story. So, a study suggests AI skills may reduce employer demand for traditional college degrees. So, like I said, some of the topics that I like to cover here in Sapiens Forward are employment and cybersecurity things that AI is impacting, healthcare, education is another one. Like these are all the things that people like me care about. I know you care about it too. So we're going to talk about college degrees and AI skills. So apparently this is research coming from PwC. So we've brought this up previously. This is Price Waterhouse Cooper and Goldman Sachs combining forces, and the research indicating that employer demand for formal college degrees could be declining for AI exposed jobs, while job growth outpaces other sectors pretty significantly. So, this is kind of um, a charged topic. I mean, in the United States, higher education is a big deal. For me growing up, people my age were always told, hey, you got to study, work hard in school so you can get into a good college. And now we see reports that recent college graduates are facing a tougher time in the job market. Um, you know, Taking a longer time to find a job, being unemployed at a higher rate than on average. So that it's kind of feeding into this idea. Ultimately, where does this go? This goes to the idea of like, will people even feel like college is a worthwhile investment? Already, a lot of people have been thinking that route, in my opinion, because college has become so expensive in the United States for a variety of reasons that are beyond the scope of what I really want to focus here on the show. But it is pretty safe to say that the average cost of tuition for university and college enrollment in the United States has gone up and outpaced the increases in inflation over the last several decades. So it's incredibly expensive. Meanwhile, a lot of people are unemployed or underemployed after graduating college, and they have these really expensive college loans to pay back. It really makes a lot of people wonder, like, was that a good investment? They were told that it was, and I don't have the reference here right now, but I've seen, in some of these studies, financial studies, anecdotally speaking here, certainly, that despite those risks, on average, it still makes sense to get a college degree. But here, let's pull up this study, because this is really suggesting that, you know, companies may not be looking for it much. And if that is the route it goes, I think there could be a potential crash in the demand for university degrees. Really high costs, not getting you a job, companies not looking for it. I mean, that's going to crash demand. So, the Fearless Future 2025 Global AI Jobs Promise. So this is a report we're talking about from PwC. And the little news bits there were really talking about AI exposed jobs and automatable jobs. So, according to this research, AI exposed jobs are jobs that contain many tasks in which AI can be used, where augmentable jobs are AI exposed jobs in which AI enhances support and supports human judgment and expertise on many tasks. Whereas automatable, the AI can carry out these tasks on its own. That's an important distinction here. Um, and so, if we go to this section of the report, this is where this news bit is coming from. Employer demand for degrees is declining faster for AI exposed jobs. So let's take a look at this. AI exposed, least exposed, augmented, automated. So we just covered kind of what those areas are, right? We see the breaking down between year. The demand is shrinking in all these different areas, apparently. I mean, this particular study, they were analyzing data from several countries, including the US. So countries kind of a mix from around the world: New Zealand, Singapore, Southeast Asia, and Oceania, mix from Europe, North America. So, so we got least exposed, augmented, and automated. The story this is really telling here is that, in the last 5 years, there is a declining demand for degrees, university degrees. And now what's interesting here is there's a decline in demand in each of these three segments. So that is fascinating to me in of itself. This is merely saying it's declining faster in these areas where AI features prominently. Augmented, there's still a human role. Automated, it could be completely AI doing the work. Now, how they're identifying this: jobs that have education data and a degree requirement. They explicitly state degree requirements. So jobs, essentially job postings that aren't actually indicating that a degree is needed, it's coming up in those figures. So this is kind of the early stages. This is something, maybe in the next year it's going to slow down. I think it's probably a little premature to develop some kind of long-term prediction. However, if I'm going to make some kind of prophecies about what I see here, I do think there's going to be some kind of correction with higher education, at least in the United States, because it is so expensive and has outpaced inflation. If it's not deemed to be something that's necessary to get a job, especially a job that may pay well and be very advantageous. So, in other reports, we've seen that jobs that are AI exposed um, are potentially more lucrative. So, if the jobs that are more lucrative also don't require a university degree, which is incredibly expensive, that doesn't really paint a really good picture for demand for university enrollment. Now, do you think people are just going to wholesale not go to university? I think a lot of people still will go to college, universities. There is going to be plenty of careers tracks where that's going to be beneficial, um, but there may be many that people just choose not to. And another reason why that may be the case is AI tools may potentially augment education itself. There may be more and more people that feel like, hey, I don't need to go to university to learn these things. Either way, higher education is being disrupted. We already know that. We've talked a little bit about how schools have started implementing AI. Schools and teachers are trying to figure out how to deal with AI. Students are trying to figure out what AI they can use. The disruption's already ongoing. We're just going to see like how quickly does it disrupt. And one thing you really got to keep in mind when it comes to disruption of systems like this, sometimes it's easy to fall into that situation where we're thinking in terms of the process is staying the same and it just kind of like impacts how we do stuff without actually recognizing that sometimes the original problem or need that caused a process to come about in the first place, that might be solved earlier on. So a whole bunch of downstream processes and activities and tasks and jobs just go away because a problem way farther up the chain was solved by automation or technology, in this case by AI. So what was really the demand for something like higher education? Well, highly specialized capabilities and knowledge needed to be able to do very specialized types of work that required very specialized education in order to teach. And in a very economic way, you get all those people together in a centralized place to do that so that you could conduct that activity of higher education, right? Well, if the educational capability to teach those highly specialized activities and skills don't need as much to be in that centralized place, you start to see how that can kind of fall out. The demand and need for universities might go away, or it might be reduced. Let's just say that, right? Highly speculative, sure, but it's really just a thought exercise. What would be any kind of takeaway of that? I don't think it's solid enough yet to be thinking, oh, I'm just going to stop investing in my kids' account to be able to go to college one day. Like that's not something I'm doing. Like I am still putting money away for my kids to go to college. But I think a lot, and I think everybody else should too. I think a lot about, well, what is college going to look like in 10, 15 years? I don't know. It could be totally different. I have a feeling people still go to college, but maybe a lot fewer people. Maybe there'll be different things. I mean, after all, in previous years, we really saw kind of a growth of it's kind of like alternative, like learning institutions around just specific skills, especially in like digital work. Really saw a big increase of schools for digital marketing and programming and stuff like that, right? Now, those might have a tough time with AI and competing, but who knows, right? Some people are just better learners in person and they're going to pay for that and want that. That's great. Overall, education disrupted. That's really the topic. And we're going to pay close attention to that to see how that proceeds. So, hey, that's the stories for today. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you like this kind of content, if you find it valuable, I hope you did, please consider giving a like on the video and on the content. If you want to get news stories and information like this on a regular basis, follow and subscribe on the channel. Anyway, thanks so much. Appreciate checking out. Take care.